Mrs. Marjorie had just turned 84 when her life took a turn no one could have imagined. Married to Arnaldo for 62 years, she led a tranquil life in the small town, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who visited her on Sundays. Her routine was as predictable as the sunrise, until that March afternoon when she decided to walk through the main square and heard for the first time the sound of a guitar that would change everything. It was Adam, a 22-year-old who had recently arrived in town playing in the square to earn a few coins. His fingers glided across the strings with a delicacy that seemed to tell stories without words, melodies that spoke directly to the heart. Marjorie stopped enchanted, feeling something she hadn't experienced in decades, an emotion that made her forget the pain in her joints and the weariness of the years. He returned the next day, and the next, and every day that week. Adam noticed the lady who always sat on the same bench, always with the same attentive gaze and a discreet smile on her lips. They began to talk. He spoke of his dreams of becoming a professional musician, of the cities he wanted to visit, of the freedom he sought. She spoke of the youth she had left behind, of the dreams she had abandoned to be a wife and mother, of the songs she used to sing when she was young. Arnaldo noticed the change. Marjorie returned from her walks different, with a sparkle in her eyes he hadn't seen in years. Suspicious, he followed his wife and discovered their meetings in the square. At first, he tried to forbid the outings, but Marjorie, for the first time in 6 decades, said no. The children were called, there were tense family meetings, tears, and accusations. How could she do this? A woman of her age, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, shaming the entire family because of a boy who could be her great-grandson. But Marjorie was determined. She explained that for the first time in her long life, she felt seen not as a mother, grandmother, or wife, but as Marjorie, as a person, as someone with her own desires and dreams. Adam saw her that way. They would talk for hours about art, music, poetry, about the life that pulsates beyond obligations and social roles. The whole town was buzzing with the scandal. In bakeries, salons, churches, everyone was talking about the old woman who had gone mad over a guitar player. They said he was senile, that the young man only wanted his money, that it was a huge disgrace. Adam also suffered from the disapproving looks and malicious gossip that painted him as a freeloader. But between them there was something genuine, a connection that transcended age, a deep friendship tempered with mutual admiration and true affection. Marjorie wasn't looking for a lover in the conventional sense. She was looking for someone who would make her feel alive again, who would remind her of who she was before becoming just a function in other people's lives. One morning in May, Marjorie packed her bags. She left a letter for Arnaldo explaining that she didn't hate him, but that she needed to live the time she had left authentically, alongside those who made her happy. She apologized to her children but said she could no longer live solely for the expectations of others. He moved into a small apartment in the city center where Adam already lived, sharing the rent and daily expenses. The family broke off relations. The grandchildren were forbidden from visiting her. The city treated her like an outcast, but Marjorie smiled more than she had in decades. She woke to the sound of the guitar, made coffee while Adam composed new melodies. They spent afternoons talking about books she had started reading again, about movies they watched together, about the beauty of the little things she had stopped noticing. Adam took care of her when her arthritis flared up. She advised him on his musical career and the paths of life. There was no carnal romance between them. There was something rarer and more precious, a true companionship, a deep understanding, a mutual respect that defied all conventions. Months passed, and Marjorie's health began to fail. Adam never abandoned her, caring for her with the dedication of a son, playing guitar beside her when the pain was intense, holding her hand during difficult nights. Marjorie said those had been the happiest months of her life, that she finally felt complete, that she regretted nothing. One autumn afternoon, surrounded by the soft melodies of the guitar, Marjorie closed her eyes for the last time with a serene smile on her lips. Adam wept as he had never wept, not even for his own mother. At the funeral, the family finally appeared, but it was Adam who carried the coffin. It was Adam who played her favorite song. It was Adam who truly honored her. Years later, when he was already a renowned musician, Adam recounted Marjorie's story in his interviews. speaking of the courageous woman who taught him that it's never too late to be free, that true human connection has no age limit, that love in its many forms is always valid when it is true. The small town still talks about the story, some with scandal, others with a hint of envy, realizing that perhaps Marjorie had discovered something that most people spend their whole lives searching for without finding: the courage to simply be who you are, without excuses, without regrets, living each remaining day as if it were a gift. Because in the end, that's exactly what it was. Adam kept Marjorie's ashes in a small wooden box she had chosen herself weeks before she passed away. Inside, alongside the ashes, he placed the last letter she had written to him, in which he said that he had been the most unexpected gift of her life, that he had given her back not only joy, but also the very identity she thought she had lost forever. In the months following Marjorie's death, Adam immersed himself in songwriting like never before. Each song carried a piece of that story, melodies that spoke of belated freedom, of love that transcends the conventional, of the courage to start over when everyone says it's too late. His first album, released a year later, included a simple but profound dedication to Marjorie. In its liner notes, the woman who had taught him that true youth resides in the soul, not the body. The songs began to play on local radio stations, then regional ones, until one of them went viral on social media. People from all over the country commented on the deeply moving lyrics, on the story of a woman who had defied everything for one last breath of true life. Journalists sought out Adam wanting to know more, and he told them everything, without shame, without fear of judgment, because Marjorie had taught him exactly that, to live without fear of what others think. Marjorie's family saw the interviews. Edithna, the youngest daughter, was the first to break the silence. She sought out Adam on a rainy afternoon, her eyes swollen from crying. She apologized for not understanding her mother, for denying her the right to be happy in her own way, for allowing pride and concern for others' opinions to be more important than the well-being of those she loved. Adam received Edithna generously, offered her coffee, showed her photos from Marjorie's last months, and told funny stories that made his daughter laugh and cry at the same time. Edithna discovered a mother she hadn't known, a woman of strong opinions, of unrestrained laughter, of dreams postponed but not forgotten. In the photographs, she saw a radiant, free, genuinely happy Marjorie in a way she couldn't remember seeing in her childhood or adult life. Gradually, other family members began to appear. Grandson Alexander, who had always been close to his grandmother, confessed that he felt enormous guilt for having distanced himself from her in the last months of her life, for having chosen the comfort of family approval instead of supporting those who had always supported him. Adam opened his doors to everyone, never holding a grudge, because Marjorie had also taught him about forgiveness and understanding. The story began to spread beyond the borders of the small town. A film production company contacted Adam, interested in turning the story into a documentary. He agreed, but on one condition: that the narrative be honest, that it not romanticize or diminish the complexity of what they had experienced, that it show Marjorie as she really was, an imperfect woman full of doubts but courageous enough to choose her own happiness even when the whole world was against her. During filming, the team interviewed people from the town. Unexpected stories emerged. Dona Conceição, a 70-year-old woman, admitted that Marjorie's courage had inspired her to finally separate from an abusive husband with whom she had lived for 5 decades out of fear and social pressure. Jorge, a 60-year-old man, recounted how he had returned to his studies and fulfilled his dream of pursuing a degree in history after seeing that Marjorie had proven it's never too late. Letters, emails, and messages appeared from people deeply touched by Marjorie's story. People who had decided to change careers in their 50s, who had left unhappy relationships in their 60s, who had begun to dream again in their 70s. Arnaldo, the husband Marjorie had left behind, gave an emotional interview. He said that at first he had felt anger, humiliation, and deep pain, but with time, especially after her death, he had begun to understand. He acknowledged that for decades he had taken for granted that Marjorie would always be there, fulfilling her role as a wife, without ever asking what she truly wanted, what she felt, or who she wished to be beyond a mother and homemaker. He admitted that their marriage had functioned on a basis of habit and convenience, not passion or true connection. He said he hadn't completely forgiven her, that it still hurt, but that he understood and, in a way, even admired the courage she had shown, courage he had always lacked. The documentary premiered at a film festival and won awards. Movie theaters screened Marjorie and Adam's story for audiences who left in silence, thoughtful, questioning their own choices and fears. Schools began using the film in discussions about autonomy, aging, love in its different forms, individual freedom versus social pressure. Teachers reported that teenagers and young adults identified with the message of living authentically, while older people saw it as permission to still dream and change. Adam became not only a famous musician but a kind of unwitting spokesperson for a larger message. In interviews, he always redirected the focus to Marjorie, making it clear that the true heroic act was hers, not his. He had simply been lucky enough to be in the right place, to have the sensitivity to recognize something special when it appeared, to have had the emotional maturity at 22, to value a deep friendship more than social conventions. In a particularly moving performance, Adam invited Edithna to the stage. She went up trembling, read the last letter Marjorie had written to her children, where she asked for forgiveness but reaffirmed her choice, where she said she loved them but that she needed to love herself too. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. After the reading, Adam played the song he had composed especially for Marjorie, the one she loved to listen to most on lazy afternoons, when the sun streamed through the window of her small apartment and she closed her eyes, smiling. Years passed and the small town changed. The park bench where Marjorie and Adam met gained a discreet plaque with a phrase of hers, "It's always time to start over." Young musicians gathered there to play, as if the place had become sacred, a meeting point for those seeking authenticity in an age of appearances. The house where Marjorie had lived with Arnaldo for 6 decades was sold. Arnaldo moved closer to one of his sons, spending the last years of his life surrounded by care, but always with that distant look of someone carrying deep regrets. Before dying, he asked to be cremated and for his ashes to be mixed with Marjorie's, in a final plea for forgiveness and reconciliation. The family respected his wish, and the ashes of both were scattered in the square, under the shade of the tree where it all began. Adam continued his career, married, had children, but never forgot those extraordinary months. On the wall of his studio, he kept framed Marjorie's favorite photograph, the one in which she laughed with her head thrown back, free, radiant, completely alive. His children grew up hearing the story of the adopted grandmother they never met, but who had changed the course of their father's life. When his eldest son turned 22, Adam gave him the guitar he had played in that square so many years before, the same instrument that had woven the melody of their improbable encounter. Along with the guitar, he delivered a letter explaining that the greatest gift he had ever received in life was not fame or money, but the lesson that true human connections don't follow predictable scripts, that love manifests itself in infinite ways, that courage has no age, and that sometimes the greatest teachers appear when and from where we least expect them. Marjorie and Adam's story became a legend in the small town and an inspiration beyond. Academic theses were written about female autonomy in old age. Documentaries explored intergenerational relationships, and support groups for the elderly used the story as an example that it's never too late to seek happiness. But in the end, beyond all analysis and interpretation, a simple and powerful truth remained. 2 souls met at the right moment, defied the world, lived fully, even if briefly, and left behind proof that truly living is always worthwhile. No matter the price, no matter what they say, no matter how much time remains, because a day lived to the fullest is worth more than decades of empty existence. And Marjorie discovered this at 84 years old, proving that true wisdom doesn't necessarily come with age, but with the courage to listen to your own heart even when the whole world insists you're wrong. 10 years after Marjorie's death, the square where it all began underwent revitalization. The city, recognizing the tourist and cultural value of the story, created a small memorial space. It wasn't ostentatious or sentimental, just a quiet corner with wooden benches, a well-kept garden, and that century-old tree under which Adam had played guitar for the first time. On weekends, local and visiting musicians played there for free, keeping alive that tradition of music in the square that had united two such unlikely lives. Sophia, a 25-year-old who worked at a nearby cafe, listened to the stories of tourists who came to visit the place. She was fascinated by their narratives of courage and authenticity. Sophia was in a relationship that didn't make her happy, engaged to a man her family approved of, but whom she didn't truly love. Marjorie's story haunted her, making her question whether she was heading towards a life of decades of pretending, postponing her own happiness for fear of disappointing others. One afternoon, she gathered her courage and broke off the engagement. Her family was outraged. Her friends said she was crazy, but Sophia felt an enormous weight lifted from her shoulders. Months later, she met someone who truly made her happy, and she always said it was Marjorie, a woman she had never met, who had given her the courage to choose her own life. Adam received an unexpected invitation from the capital city university to give a lecture about his experience. He had never considered himself an academic or a lecturer, but he accepted thinking that Marjorie would want the story to continue reaching people. In the packed auditorium, he recounted not only the beautiful moments but also the difficult ones, the nights when Marjorie cried missing her grandchildren, the moments when he himself doubted whether they were doing the right thing, the disapproving looks that hurt more than they admitted. He spoke about how Marjorie never romanticized the situation, knew exactly what she was losing, but consciously chose what she was gaining, and that made all the difference between an irresponsible impulse and a mature decision. In the audience was Augusto, a retired 76-year-old professor. Widowed for 5 years, he had completely isolated himself, convinced that his life was over, that the rest would only be waiting for the end. Adam's lecture deeply shook him. Later, in line to speak with the musician, Augusto broke down in tears, recounting how he had given up on life when his wife died, how he had stopped doing everything he enjoyed, how he was just going through the motions. Adam embraced the old professor and said the same words Marjorie had told him so many times. As long as you breathe, you can start again. Augusto returned home transformed, enrolled in painting classes he had always dreamed of taking, began to travel, made new friends, and at 80 years old, said he was living better than he had in the last 20. The story inspired a play in São Paulo. The playwright took creative liberties but maintained the essence, that search for authenticity that transcends age and conventions. On opening night, Adam was present along with several members of Marjorie's family. Seeing the story of his mother and grandmother staged in a large theater in the capital brought contradictory emotions. Pride in her courage, sadness for the lost opportunity to support her in life, gratitude that Adam was able to give her something that her own family had failed to offer, unconditional acceptance. Pedro, Marjorie's eldest son, finally reconciled completely with the memory of his mother that night. After the play, he sought out Adam backstage and apologized not for the 10th but for the 100th time. Adam, already tired of apologies, said something Pedro would never forget. His mother didn't want apologies. She wanted them to understand that she was a complete person, not just a family role. And now that they understand this, they should honor her by living authentically as well. Pedro took those words home and began to apply them to his own life, allowing himself to dream again, pursue goals he had abandoned, and be more present and genuine with his own children. The internet, as always, brought forth dissenting voices. Some commentators questioned whether the story was true. Others said it romanticized an inappropriate relationship. Some even suggested that Marjorie suffered from dementia and had been manipulated. Adam had learned over the years not to respond to every attack, but when a particularly virulent columnist published an article calling Marjorie selfish and irresponsible, he wrote a public response. It wasn't angry or defensive. It was a careful explanation about autonomy, about each person's right to choose their own life, about how decades of dedication to family don't create an eternal debt that needs to be paid with one's own happiness. The text went viral, generated heated debates, but also opened space for thousands of people to share their own stories of difficult choices, of courage to change, of struggles for authenticity. Marina, Marjorie's great-granddaughter, who was only 5 years old when her great-grandmother died, grew up hearing the story. As a teenager, she did a school project on her great-grandmother, whom she never really knew. She researched, interviewed family members, and had long conversations with Adam. She discovered a Marjorie far more complex than the legend portrayed, a woman who had moments of profound doubt, who suffered from family rejection, who sometimes wondered if she had made the right decision. But she also discovered that even in the most difficult moments, Marjorie never showed true regret, only the natural sadness of someone who wished she could have everything but knew that life demands choices. Marina presented her work to the class and at the end said something that made the teacher cry. "My great-grandmother taught me that courage is not the absence of fear or doubt. It's acting despite them. It's choosing what makes you feel alive even when everyone tells you not to." Adam released his 5th album on the 20th anniversary of Marjorie's death. Unlike his previous albums, this one didn't directly address her, but it carried everything she had taught him: songs about freedom, authenticity, and having the courage to be who you are. The final track was a recording he had secretly made on one of those lazy afternoons in the apartment, of Marjorie humming an old song while making tea. Her trembling but sweet voice, singing about lost loves and postponed dreams, closed the album in a way that would bring tears to anyone who knew the story. The small town, which had initially rejected Marjorie, now celebrated her as an illustrious daughter. The irony did not go unnoticed by those who had lived through the initial scandal. Joachim, the owner of the market where Marjorie had shopped for decades, admitted in an interview that he was one of those who had most condemned her at the time, even asking her not to return to the store so as not to scare away other customers. Now, at 85 years old, he said with tears in his eyes that it was one of the greatest shames of his life, having turned his back on a customer and friend of decades because of prejudice and fear of what others would say. He used her story as an example in conversations with his grandchildren, warning them about the dangers of judging without understanding, of letting the opinion of the majority determine how they treat people. A group of researchers in the field of gerontology published a study using Marjorie's story as an exemplary case of autonomy and quality of life in old age. The work argued that society profoundly fails the elderly by placing them in restrictive boxes, expecting them to be merely loving grandparents and tranquil retirees, denying them emotional complexity and the right to desire, change, and the pursuit of happiness. The study sparked debates at medical and healthcare conferences, led to the creation of new care protocols that better respected the autonomy of elderly patients, and inspired changes in how nursing homes and assisted living facilities dealt with the sexuality and relationships of their residents. Adam, now 45, received messages almost daily from people recounting how Marjorie's story had changed their lives. There was the 68-year-old woman who had returned to studying dance, the 72-year-old man who had come out of the closet after a lifetime of hiding his sexuality, the 80-year-old woman who had left an abusive marriage after 5 decades of silent suffering. Each story was a testament to the transformative power of that simple yet profound narrative. 2 people who met, connected authentically, and had the courage to honor that connection despite everything. On a rainy afternoon, Adam visited the square as he occasionally did. He sat on the same bench where Marjorie used to sit to listen to him play. An elderly couple was there. She must have been about 80 years old. He no more than 30. They were chatting animatedly, laughing, sharing an ice cream. Adam smiled, recognizing the scene. He approached and greeted the couple. The lady, Dona Beatriz, recognized Adam immediately and explained that Marjorie's story had given her the courage, after being widowed at 77, to allow herself a new relationship with Caio, a literature professor she had met in a library. It wasn't the same as her story with Marjorie, she clarified, because there was romance and physical passion here too, but the essence was the same: 2 people genuinely connecting without caring what the world thought. Adam hugged them both and said that Marjorie would be happy to know that her courage continued to resonate, giving permission for others to live their truths. Adam's children grew up hearing about Marjorie as if she were part of the family. When his daughter Laura turned 18 and was distressed about her career choice, pressured by her grandparents to pursue medicine when her dream was dance, Adam took her to the park. They sat on that special bench, and he recounted again in details he had never shared before, Marjorie's fears, the nights she questioned whether she was being selfish, how she finally found peace understanding that living authentically is not selfishness, but honesty with herself and the world. Laura cried, hugged her father, and the next day told her grandparents she would take up dance. The family didn't like it. There was conflict, but Laura stood firm, and years later she would become a renowned dancer who always credited her courage to the adopted great-grandmother she never knew. Adam grew old playing the guitar. At 63, his fingers no longer had the same agility as before, but the music still flowed with the same soul. One afternoon, without much occasion or special date, he returned to that square. The bench was still there, the tree older and more leafy, its leaves dancing in the wind. He sat down with his guitar in his lap and began to play the melody he had played on that first day, so many decades ago. A woman walked slowly past, leaning on a cane. He stopped when he heard the music, smiled, and sat down on a nearby bench. He closed his eyes as if recognizing something familiar, as if allowing himself, even if only for a moment, to feel without fear. Adam continued playing without haste, without expecting anything, simply letting the music flow as he always had. When she finished, the lady thanked him with a discreet nod and went on her way. Adam put away his guitar, looked at the sky that was beginning to turn orange at the end of the afternoon, and realized that he didn't need grand answers or profound meanings. Marjorie had taught him that sometimes things simply are what they are, that some encounters change everything without needing explanations, that life continues weaving its unexpected melodies for those who have the courage to listen. He got up and walked home, the guitar case swaying slightly beside him, leaving behind only the echo of a song in the empty square and the silent certainty that some stories never truly end. They merely become part of the air that other people breathe when they need the courage to live.